CBS News has learned 3 senior department officials have completed an unannounced trip to Cuba over new concerns over the so-called sonic attacks that injured 26 U.S. diplomats and their families may be continuing. CBS News radio executive editor Steve Dorsey was the first to break the story and joins me now from Washington. Steve, what can you tell us about this unannounced visit?
Yeah, well, these are very senior officials at the State Department, from Western Hemisphere Affairs, from management, from diplomatic security, and they've been in Havana, Cuba for the last few days, wrapping up their trip this afternoon. And they've been probing the fallout and the effects of what the State Department is describing as new health attacks against U.S. diplomats based there. The State Department says these most recent attacks were in May at a single home, a diplomatic residence. They were confirmed 2 injuries in May, bringing the total number of Americans injured in Cuba to 26. This is the first case, according to the State Department, since attacks back in August of last year. Remember, this saga began in November 2016.
Right. So remind us, give us more details about these attacks. What is happening exactly? What medical symptoms are we seeing?
Absolutely. Well, they're bizarre from whatever point you look at them. We understand that several of these victims reported hearing strange sounds inside their homes, inside hotel rooms. They were later diagnosed with a variety of what the State Department had first called physical symptoms. Those included everything from hearing loss to the kind of signs you would see in someone who suffered a concussion. And in fact, this group of Americans was evaluated by doctors and specialists at the University of Pennsylvania, and they concluded it's possible they were subjected to some kind of new mechanism of injury for brain trauma.
Oh, so it's so mysterious. Now, Steve, aren't there U.S. diplomats in China who are reportedly experiencing similar attacks?
Absolutely. And at least one of those diplomats, according to the State Department, suffered similar symptoms after reporting strange sensations, strange sounds, and pressure at the Guangzhou U.S. consulate in China. And since then, a number of U.S. diplomats from around the country, from around the mission to China, in Beijing and other locations, have been evacuated to the U.S. for medical testing and treatment. Again, though, only one person has been confirmed with similar injuries to those suffered in Cuba. I did speak yesterday with one of those people who was evacuated. He says he's undergoing treatment at the University of Pennsylvania. He'll be in New York as well to see doctors. He says he's improving, but at a slow rate.
And Steve, have U.S. officials made any connections between what's happening in China and what's happening in Cuba to U.S. diplomats?
Not yet. So far, the State Department calls what's going on in Cuba health attacks. They've stopped short of saying it's the same thing in China. They've taken reciprocal measures to kick out Cuban embassy employees in Washington, to nearly shutter its own embassy in Havana. They have not done the same thing in China. They have, however, been using this whole case to complete a long-awaited report. This is from the State Department, from their Accountability Review Board. Their work began on February the 9th, according to the State Department. They recently wrapped up. This report is now in the hands of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. A source on Capitol Hill at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee tells me that that committee is now awaiting a briefing on the findings and recommendations presented in this report to Secretary Pompeo.
And Steve, how is the Cuban government responding?
Well, the Cuban government says it didn't have anything to do with what's going on there, injuring these diplomats.
Do they have any explanation, any idea who might be doing it?
Well, they have not offered any theories, except perhaps that it's mass hysteria. And perhaps the U.S. is manipulating this in a political way to take action and destroy the warming relationship between the U.S. and Cuba under the Obama administration.
And finally, Steve, for those diplomats that were injured a year ago when this began, have they seen any improvement? How is their health now?
Some of them have reported improvements. They've been undergoing a battery of tests and evaluations at the University of Pennsylvania and elsewhere. This is likely to continue for months. I'm told by one lawyer who's trying to work with some of these victims that they're trying to seek some kind of workers' compensation or other measures to protect their work status as they try to cope with their own injuries now.
We certainly hope that they recover. Steve Dorsey, thank you for your